Okay, so week 8. First assignment, and only assignment that we did this week, has to do with blending modes or blend modes. So blend modes are a way of, in Photoshop, um, here we go, having two layers, how they interact with each other, right? So the bottom layer is the black and white image, and then the next layer is the square, and normally it just says normal. And you can set the opacity to something different, but that's just, it's kind of ignoring the underneath layer, right? As we set this to 70% opacity, it's putting this new layer on top sort of evenly, right? Looks very, just looks very Photoshoppy, and the same thing would happen if you used a brush to paint on this. But a blend mode is another way of combining things. So what you'll want to do is at least get the weathered face picture. I also provided this other one because using two different images and not just flat colors is also another way to see things. So we're going to save that too. And the other things that are here are, if we go to this blend mode descriptions, it's a Word doc I put together that has the very technical description of how everything interacts. So if you're really looking to get into this type of compositing, it's good to know what these things mean technically. But we're going to be looking more at like how they functionally behave. So it's good to know that multiply looks at the color information of each channel and multiplies the base color by the blend color, base being the one underneath, blend being the one on top. The result color is always a darker color. So we're going to notice that it always gets a bit darker. We're going to notice that white will leave the other color unchanged, and there's a practical use for that in art. But those technical definitions are there. We're going to be looking more generally at how they function, what they look like. And we're starting off with a flat color because flat colors are a little bit easier to work with and kind of see how they go. So if I select this one square right here and I say, instead of normal, darken, right? So now that looks very different than if I put this one up here. This will kind of be our control. I'll put it at 50%, right? That's not the same thing at all. You can tell that it's combining things. It's actually kind of changed the color because it's made it kind of green. Multiplies a little bit different. The way it's combining the two colors, we're not getting that sort of weird, green looking effect anymore. I'll put the darken down here, right? So this is making a very digital effect. This is a little bit more subtle. And if I turn down the opacity on that, right? I'll put it at 50% just like the normal one. So if we've got normal on the right and multiply on the left, I mean, which one are you going to like better, right? This looks like all hazy, like all the dark lines have gotten less dark because it's being lightened by this stuff. Here, it's adding more like a tint to it, right? That's somewhat like what we did with the leaf girl, where we said of these blend modes, we said put it to color, right? Now, putting it to color does straight color, so it adds exactly that color to all of the pixels and then leaves the light and dark alone. Multiplies a little bit different. It is going to change the shading a little bit. But you can see now why we're not reading descriptions, we're just doing this. Because going through these and seeing how each of them gets affected, that's gonna make a better impression, I think, than just reading the descriptions. The other thing to keep in mind, I'm going to, let's see here. There we go. So we're going to change the color of this one. We're going to change it to something much darker. There we go. So if you have solid colors, first of all, if you're working with black and white at all, it's things are going to behave a little bit differently. But also, dark colors will interact with these things different than light colors. So up here, I'm going to turn these two off. These are both multiply. But obviously this is a much lighter color, this is a much darker, much more saturated color. Actually, I probably should have chosen a less saturated color. So but you can see what a difference that makes. They don't have the same effect. So you, even if you read about what these things do and you kind of get a general sense of how they're going to interact, when you change what the blend color is going to be, whether it's a solid color or an image, things are going to react differently. They're not going to be the same. It's because each color is going to react in its own way. So all of these ones that are part of this top section right here, darken, multiply, color burn, these are all going to result in a somewhat darker image, especially if you leave their opacity at 100%, which I didn't do. I turned it down to 50, but it's always going to result in a darker image. Likewise, everything that's from this next section that says lighten, so if I say screen and I say color dodge, you're always going to end up with a brighter image than what you had before. Now in this case it's almost like a neon brighter. Here it's taking out the there we go, the blackened area that is in the background. So it's actually just eliminating it altogether. This one didn't, right? So color dodge will not eliminate the blacks, but lighten will. And so will screen, right? So they're all going to work a little bit differently. I'm going to turn this one to, let's see if lighter color. Yeah, so they all behave a little bit differently, but they're all going to brighten and or lighten the image, just in very different ways. This I would say is more brighter, this is more lighter. The next set of ones, there's not really, it's more of like changing the lighting, I guess, would be a good way to put it. There's no real, I don't know, it's not as much of a collection to them. I'd say that these ones actually, in this section right here, the one that says overlay, soft light, hard light, these blend the best. From my personal experience, these ones blend together with whatever you're doing very well. They do a better job of taking into account the fact that there's lights and darks, right? So for this one, which is called overlay and soft light, these two are ones I use a lot actually. And it's because it's tinted the image. If I turn these, we'll do half and half. Overlay. All right. So you can see that it's tinted the image, but it's really taken into account the lights and darks. The overall lightness and darkness is the same-ish. It's just that we've added a bit of a tint to it. And if you'll remember when we did the vintage image a ways back and you guys were using like hue and saturation and things like that to change the overall color, this is another way to change the overall color and tone of something. And then if you're looking at, this one and thinking, oh, it's just like a little bit, too much, you can always turn down the opacity a little bit. So I've turned down the opacity a little bit. It's not as bright, but it's definitely not the black and white image, right? It's got a little bit of a tint to it, and but it didn't change the overall lightness and darkness of the image. So that's what those ones would be used for. And then some of these last ones, they go pretty crazy. Some of them. There we go. Right. So some of these may have been very useful when we did the psychedelic one, especially this one. So there's always a few that'll go a little crazy. That's okay. So we've also got these ones that completely do like unexpected things, right? There's no orange in these two. If you worked with a blue square, you would have a completely different look, right? So if I was to, there we go. So I painted with blue, but it's being subtracted, and now we're getting the sort of opposite color. Same with, nope, this one. Although you can see what a difference that makes, though, between the two. So divide and subtract are both resulting in the opposite hue that we would expect, but the subtract one is keeping the lighting the same. The dark parts are dark and the light parts are light. This one is greatly altering, if we use the blue color, which is a darker hue, you'll remember, than the orange. It's lightening the darker areas. It's altering them quite significantly. So even those two behave differently. But the best thing you can do with any of these is just tinker. is just go through and like throw stuff in here and see how it reacts. I'm going to open up an image somewhere. Let's see. Yeah, there's the trees. So we're going to bring this over to here and put it in the wrong area. There it is. Trying to get it out of the folders is, when it ends up in a folder, is not easy. There we go. And we're going, it's way bigger than my image, so we have to shrink it a little. I used Control T to bring up the free transform tool. And there we go. That's more usable. So when it comes to not just flat colors, this is going to behave sometimes very crazy, right? So you want to test things out, see how they look. You're all going to have your different preferences. I said I use soft light and overlay a lot, but I tend to like softer looks to things that maintain the image more carefully. All right, so we'll put that back. The last thing I'd say is I mentioned some of these have practical applications. So with the, let me turn these on again and turn those off. So like I said, overlay and soft light are a good way to add a tint to something pretty easily, and you'll have control over it because it'll be separate. It won't be, and it's not as over processing the image. Remember, when you use layer, new layer adjustment, these tend to make your image, they do a lot of work to your image. They change the levels very easily, and the histogram would look nuts. But you can see this histogram actually doesn't look too bad. Let me turn these up, right? So it's not as over processed. That's the original. Let me turn, yep. So that's the original histogram of this image under levels, and you can see when I turn this on, I mean, it alters it. It makes it lighter and it takes away the middles, but it doesn't crunch anything. It doesn't crush anything. You don't get pixelation except for a little bit here. See if I turn that one off. So you don't get those weird blocks that you would normally get. Let me turn that off. So this is sort of like a safer, less intrusive way to alter the photograph. Another practical thing for those of you who are into art and animation. So let's say, I'm going to bring this up. There we go. So I'm going to bring my brush up. And it doesn't want to work because that layer's not on. There we go. And I'm going to create something that looks like a piece of paper, right? So if you're scanning stuff in, there we go. And I'm drawing with a mouse, so this is not going to look like a real drawing at all. There. So a bunch of scribbles. Let's say you've got your fantastic drawing, your animation you've been working on forever, and you want to add color to this animation, right? Well, I'm going to add a layer below this. Now, we have worked before with things that can select wrong layer. With things that can select everything that's not the black and white or the black part of the image and, you know, delete it, and that kind of works. But if you have lots and lots of drawings and they're scanned in drawings, you're not going to have these perfect edges that this has. And if you have lots and lots of drawings, that's very, very tedious to have to do that. I just realized I need closed shapes to show what I'm going to show. It's a birthday cake. So in order to color this image, instead of trying to get rid of the white, we're going to set the black and white layer to multiply. Nothing happens yet. I'm going to call that black and white. And we're going to call this one color. Right? So we got two layers, black and white and a color. And on the color layer, I'm going to take my brush and I'm going to find some crazy fuchsia color. And on the layer underneath, it's a black and white image. I haven't taken away anything yet. But I'm going to paint. I'm going to paint with a better brush than that. There we go. All right, so imagine doing this with a tablet too and not a mouse like I'm doing right now. But you can see that because the top layer is set to multiply, and I said before that multiply gets rid of all of the white in an image, the white will kind of go away. And what we're left with is the color that's underneath, right? I was doing this underneath the black and white layer. And so you don't have to worry about getting rid of everything, and you don't have to worry about the edges. The edges will all come out really nice. I have done this with pencil drawings. It also works with pencil drawings because you'll still get the shading, right? If you were drawing, go to this layer, just kidding. If you draw with a fuzzier, brush or, anything like that, it will maintain that transparency because it's just getting rid of the white part. So you can see here that it's got all that transparency from that fuzzy black brush that was there. So no matter what kind of image you're bringing in, as long as the image is on a piece of fairly white sheet of paper, this is a good way to start digitally coloring. I've done entire short films like this before, where you bring the paper images into the computer and you color them digitally. So that's all because you said it's a multiply. If I said it's a normal, we don't see anything. Any of the others will not. Actually, a lot of these might kind of work like that because you're dealing with a white. That one got a little weird. But yeah, multiply is the way to go. All right, so your homework is to start with this image. You don't need these guides here if you don't want them. And to come up with just something interesting using at least 4 different blend modes. Some people did this all in one thing like this, where they, came up with 4 different, sections, and they would set them each to one of those things. So one is soft light, one is multiply, one is overlay, one is hard light, and seeing how each one affects it differently. And I've got the other effects and paintbrush things in there. Other people gave me a couple different ones. Other people stacked them, so they might have all of that and then throw this guy on top somehow. It's kind of erasing everything, but there we go. So however you would like to piece this together, you can. And I actually just thought of one last thing. So I'm going to dump some of these layers. There it is. So I mentioned before blending in with brush strokes. So let's say we wanted to add something. I keep going with warm colors because this looks like a warm color kind of drawing here. So I have my brush, and even if I set my brush to like 40% opacity, so I have more control. Well, you can see. So obviously, besides slowing down, this just looks awful. Even if you give it kind of fuzzier edges, you can see the paintbrush, so it's hard to kind of blend into anything. But if we set this to soft light, you can start to, again, it's interacting better, so you can start to bring in, having a not hard brush would also help. And also, you'd be surprised how low opacity can go and make it still usable. Right? So if you're trying to paint onto an image using the computer, and you're talking about a photographic image, then you really want to start using blend modes, because what they do is they take into account the lightness and darkness of the image that's beneath it, and they don't ignore that. And so you're really like blending into, that's why they're called blend modes, into what's already there. You just still have to pay attention to the brush opacity and the hard soft edges and things like that, but it goes a long way towards not like ruining your image with that. Right? Like there's a big difference between how these two things look. All right, so there's a lot of different reasons to want to use these tools, and that's one of them. All right, so this is just an exercise that we did in class. We only had like maybe half an hour. This is not like a whole big, hours long week project because we spent most of the class working on the midterms. All right, so just come up with something fun that, just is using these blend modes to their full effect.